Um, this book talk series is to help us know about books and how they've changed people's lives. Because words can inspire us, they can frighten us, they can enlighten our minds, and they can darken our thinking. Words have much power, and the written word has power in itself too. This is to encourage you to read and explore, to ask questions, and talk about ideas. Our presenter today is Jack Carroll. He has been teaching English at BYU Idaho since 1995. He went to BYU in Provo for his undergraduate degree. He wrote a master's actually on this book, right? Mm-hmm. On this title, and has a PhD. One of these is from the University of Illinois. Are they both?
Master's from the University of Illinois, PhD from the University of Idaho.
Idaho, okay. I knew I missed something. And then he has written 4 books that are available here at the BYU Idaho Library. And we will turn the time over to you. If you haven't gotten a brownie or a raffle, if you want to enter the raffle for the book, then you can do that. But mine is now yours.
Thank you. Well, it's great to be here to talk about a book that changed me. This is a book that's been a part of my life for more than 30 years now. And this book, probably the sweetest thing you'll get in this presentation will be the brownies, because this book, Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor, it's not the kind of book that you want to, curl up and have a nice quilt around you and read a cozy little story. This book is dark. It's funny in a kind of a biting way. It's very profound. It's centered on Christ in a way that might be a little unsettling to us because we're not used to this kind of view, but it's nonetheless true, I think, the approach. And yeah, it's had a big impact on me, and I'm just astonished that this many people would come for something like this. So Flannery O'Connor, Wise Blood, click, does that work? That doesn't work, okay? How about this click, does that work? Okay. Oh, do I have to go down there? I was just hoping I could hit the space bar to go. Is anybody an expert on these things?
So the
arrow. Okay, so this book, the way I got introduced to Flannery O'Connor, I was going to college at Utah Valley Community College, which is now UVU, and in a freshman writing class, we were assigned to read the story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, by Flannery O'Connor. And it blew me away. I absolutely loved it. And that Christmas, my wife gave me the complete stories of Flannery O'Connor, and I read those. And most of the time, I had no idea what was going on, but I just had a sense there's something here. I don't quite get it because I'm not smart enough to get it, but there's something going on here, and I just loved it. Maybe it's because I grew up in Southern Illinois and I grew up around a lot of people. Well, in fact, the phrase white trash was just part of my vocabulary growing up in Southern Illinois, poor people, rural people, that sort of thing. And that's who most of O'Connor's characters are. In fact, there is no such thing as an attractive person in any novel or story by Flannery O'Connor. And there's a reason for this. The reason is she believed we are all fallen. And in a certain way, we're all ugly because we're fallen and we're sinners. And that was part of the whole point of what her writing was about. So when I was a senior English major at BYU in 1992, I had an American Lit class. It was modern American literature, and the professor said, in addition to the readings on the list, I want you to read a book that you've never read before, written in the United States in the 20th century, that you've wanted to read but haven't read, okay? And so I picked Wise Blood. I read about it, I hadn't read it, and I was blown away by that. And so then 2 years later, when it was time to do a Master of Arts at Illinois State University and do a master's thesis on a book, I knew Wise Blood was going to be the book that I would do my thesis on. And the title of my thesis is The Form and Function of the Grotesque in Flannery O'Connor's Wise Blood. And the literary grotesque, we're probably all familiar with it in certain ways. Well, we've seen things like Frankenstein. Has anybody watched the movie? Well, I don't know. Can you watch this movie? I don't think it's rated R. Has anybody watched the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Okay, that movie gives us a kind of a sense of the grotesque. The grotesque has to do really with exaggeration, the exaggeration of the features. In fact, we've all seen cartoons in which they have a political character or something, and maybe a person has a big nose, and the caricature makes them have a really big nose, right? That caricature that we're used to in comics, political comics and so on, that's very much like what the grotesque is. Let's take what is there and let's exaggerate it, okay? And this is what O'Connor did. So what did we decide? That arrow. Okay, who was O'Connor? Mary Flannery O'Connor. She was, she didn't want to have her books be Mary O'Connor because she thought people would think she was an Irish Catholic. She wasn't an Irish Catholic, but she was Catholic. She was a very devout Catholic. American novelist, short story writer, and essayist. Lived in most of her life in the small town of Milledgeville, Georgia. She was born in 1925 and died in 1964 at age 39 of lupus. And her father had gotten lupus and had passed away when she was 16. And she would tell people, she says, when my dad had lupus, there was nothing for it but the undertaker. But by the time she had lupus, they had some medicines and things. In fact, one of the medicines was a hormone derived from pig's blood, and she had to have, I think they were monthly injections towards the end of her life. And she made the joke. She said, and in the New Testament, somebody touches the hem of Jesus's garment and is healed, right? She makes this joke. She says, if pigs wore garments, I wouldn't be worthy to touch the hems of them, right? Because that's what kept her alive. And so she lived probably 10, 15 years longer because of the medicines that they did not have available when her father had lupus. By the way, she never married. She had some romances. She had her heart broken a couple of times. And I think due to the complications of being sick and so on, she never married. And she was a devout Catholic. In fact, when she was going to graduate school, there was the last year of graduate school, she decided to go to Catholic Mass every day because she thought, I'm getting all filled up with all this worldly knowledge and I want to stay balanced. So she went to Mass every day in addition to her studies, because one of the things she did not want to do is leave college and become what she called a big intellectual. In other words, leave college and be someone who's got so doggone smart that they don't need God anymore. And she did not want that in her life. What else then? Her education, she graduated from the Georgia State College for Women in 1945, and then she went and got an MFA in creative writing at the Iowa Writers Workshop. And when she did that, nowadays you've probably heard about people who get an MFA in creative writing. And it's called a workshop because they do a lot of, they write their stories and then they read them together and they all sit around and talk about them. Well, in O'Connor's day, the Iowa Writers Workshop was the one and only such program, and today it's still the top program in the country for creative writing, and pretty much every MFA program in creative writing in the country, their program is modeled after Iowa's program. And then after she graduated with her MFA, she did a fellowship at Yaddo in New York State. That's a picture of it. It's still a place today where musicians, artists, writers, painters, anyone, if you're lucky enough, you apply and you get this fellowship and you get to go there and work on your art for a full year, and it's all paid for. And she worked on a lot of Wise Blood during that time there at Yaddo. Wise Blood was published in 1952. She was just 27 when the book was published. Ain't she cute in that picture? There she is, and this is at a signing ceremony, right? And it was published by a New York publisher, a major New York publisher, which was kind of a big deal for 27-year-old Flannery O'Connor. And it was later made into a film in 1979, directed by John Huston. And the film is very true to the book and just as crazy as the book. It's a crazy story. I'll tell you more about it. I want to read a little excerpt here first, though. So the book opens up with Hazel Motes. Haze, he's in a haze. Motes, mote in his eye. The book opens up with Hazel Motes, and he's on a train. He's been discharged from the army, and he's going to the big city. Okay, he says, I'm going to go do some things I've never done before. And so the book starts off with this. Hazel Motes sat at a forward angle on the green plush train seat, looking 1 minute at the window as if he might want to jump out of it, and the next down the aisle at the other end of the car. The train was racing through treetops that fell away at intervals and showed the sun standing very red on the edge of the farthest woods. Nearer, the plowed fields curved and faded, and a few hogs nosing in the furrows looked like large spotted stones. Mrs. Wally B. Hitchcock, who was facing Motes in the section, said that she thought the early evening like this was the prettiest time of day, and she asked him if he didn't think so too. She was a fat woman with pink collars and cuffs and pear-shaped legs that slanted off the train seat and didn't reach the floor. That's the opening paragraph of Wise Blood. And then in a little bit, after a few pages, Mrs. Wally B. Hitchcock continues talking, and she says, Mrs. Hitchcock said, well, the time flies. She said she hadn't seen her sister's children in 5 years, and she didn't know if they'd know them if she saw them. There were 3 of them, Roy, Bubber, and John Wesley. John Wesley was 6 years old, and he had written her a letter. Dear Mama Doll. They called her Mama Doll and her husband Papa Doll. And then Hazel Motes leans forward while she's in the middle of this and says, I reckon you think you've been redeemed. And Mrs. Hitchcock snatched her collar, and then he repeated it, and then she blushed. After a second, she said, yes, life was an inspiration. Okay, so this is Hazel Motes. This is our introduction to this guy. This is a guy who he is out of the army. He's going to go to the city. And there's one thing he learned in the army. He learned that there is no sin. Okay, that's where he starts off, right? Okay, well, hopefully, I wanted to kind of shock you. Hopefully, it's a shocking book. It's crazy. It's a crazy book. I love it. And so Hazel Motes gets to the city, and he buys a car, and then he parks the car in front of movie theaters, and he stands on the hood of the car, and he starts preaching the true church without Christ. Okay? And what does he say about that church? He says this. He says, I preach the church without Christ. I'm member and preacher to that church where the blind don't see and the lame don't walk and what's dead stays that way. And O'Connor knew that if there is a Christ, the blind will see and the lame will walk, and what's dead will be redeemed and risen. But if you don't believe in Christ, then what Hazel Motes is saying is truth. And then he says, I'm going to preach there was no fall because there was nothing to fall from, and no redemption because there was no fall, and no judgment because there wasn't the first 2. And if you read in the Book of Mormon, it pretty much lays this out. If there is sin, there's a fall, and if there's a fall, there's either redemption or we're all lost, right? So Hazel Motes' logic is perfect, but he's got some problems, okay? So what happens in the book? This is a picture from the movie. So this is Hazel Motes, this is Enoch Emery, and this is Sabbath Lily Hawks. So Hazel Motes goes to the city. I can't see that. This one. He meets Enoch Emery, who's 16 years old, and says, nobody here is friendly in the city. So Enoch Emery's kind of lost in the city too. But maybe the difference with Hazel is Hazel thinks he's not lost. Maybe that's part of what the whole book is about. Hazel is lost more than anybody in the book, but he thinks he isn't. He says, "Can't I see what's true? Ain't I got eyes in my head?" What else then happens? He meets Asa Hawks and Sabbath Lily. Asa Hawks is a street preacher who's now just a beggar, and he promised to blind himself in front of his congregation to show his faith in Christ. So he's got scars down his face and he wears dark glasses. And Sabbath Lily is Asa Hawks' daughter, and she takes a liking to Hazel right away. She says at one point, she says to her dad, I took one look at him and said, I got to get me some of that. So it's really kind of a romance story. Well, only in a twisted way. Okay, what else happens? Ani J. Holy comes along and sees Hazel preaching, and Hazel's drawing a crowd. Now, Ani J. Holy, that's not his real name, that's his radio name. He's got a radio program called Soulsies. And his real name is Hoover Shotes. And that's interesting because a shote is a kind of a pig. I think it's a young female pig. So Hoover Shotes, Ani J. Holy, I've got to read you some of Ani J. Holy. He says to the people on the streets, well, this book is so old, it's 30-some years old. This is the book I used when I was doing my master's thesis, so it's all falling apart. He says to the people on the streets, then I met this prophet here. He said, pointing at Hazel in the nose of the car. That was 2 months ago, folks, that I heard how he was out to help me, how he was preaching the Church of Christ without Christ. Now, wait a minute. Hazel's church was called the Church Without Christ. Ani J. Holy changes the name to the Church of Christ Without Christ, which of course makes no more sense than the original name, right? The church that was going to get a new Jesus to help me bring my sweet nature into the open where everybody could enjoy it. That was 2 months ago, friends, and now you wouldn't know me for the same man. I love every one of you people, and I want you to listen to him and me and join our church, the Holy Church of Christ Without Christ, the new church with the new Jesus, and then you'll all be helped like me. Hayes leaned forward and to the people and said, this man is not true. I never saw him before tonight. I wasn't preaching this church 2 months ago, and the name of it ain't the Holy Church of Christ Without Christ. So Ani J. Holy's trying to get in there, and he's going to say it's only going to cost you $1 a piece to join this church. And Hazel said, that's not true. So what happens? Now, friends, Ani J. Holy said, I want to tell you the second reason why you can absolutely trust this church. It's based on the Bible. Yes, sir, it's based on your own personal interpretation of the Bible. And friends, and he also says it's a new church, it's brand new. And so there won't be anybody who's got anything ahead of you because this is the newest church there is, Ani J. Holy says. And then he says, that's why I want every one of you people to join the Holy Church of Christ Without Christ. It'll cost you each $1, but what is $1? A few dimes, not too much, to pay to unlock that little rose of sweetness inside you. Ani J. Holy says, well, Hazel Notes is not interested in this. Hazel says he wants the truth. He does say he wants the truth. I believe he wants the truth, and he thinks the truth is that there is no Christ. That's what he thinks the truth is. What happens next? Oh, there's a mummy. It's crazy. There's a mummy. And then ends with blinding and death, okay? So no happy ending here, folks. In fact, the ending still puzzles me to this day, what's going on. Okay, what else? Then, O'Connor, like I said, she was a devout Catholic. She believed in Christ. And it's interesting too, she grew up in Milledgeville, Georgia, as a Catholic. So she's living most of her life. This would be very much like being a Catholic living in Rexburg, right? She was surrounded by Protestants. And this is back in the 1950s when plenty of Protestants still would say out loud that the Catholic Church was the whore of Babylon, right? So there she is with her Catholic faith in a little Protestant Georgia town. And so this was very much a part of her, but she also believed in that time. See, it's the 1950s. We had won the war. We were the greatest country on earth, and we did it all. And technology and science. Has anybody ever seen Nacho Libre? Is it because I believe in science? Right? Darwinism is coming to the fore. Secularism. There is no God, or if there is a God, we want to keep him in a nice, comfortable place where he doesn't upset our lives. In fact, one of the characters in Wise Blood says, religion is an important part of life as long as you keep it in proper perspective, right? As long as you don't let your religion take you over. As long as you don't believe something like you should lay down your life for Christ. That's a little excessive, right? To lay down your life for Christ. Let's have religion be nice and comfortable and not get out of hand. And this was what O'Connor saw was the thinking of the day in the 1950s. We're America, we're strong, we won those wars, we saved the world, and we did it all on our own with our youth and strength and technology and our science, right? And so she saw herself as preaching. Well, I shouldn't have said preaching, but she was, I think, in a way. I'll take that back. The jury will disregard that statement. She saw herself as writing to a world that did not realize what mattered and what didn't. That they thought what mattered was prosperity and success and getting ahead and having a nice house and all these things, when for O'Connor, only one thing mattered, and that was the redemption of Jesus Christ. So what's curious about Wise Blood is nobody in the book Wise Blood denies Christ, except for Hazel Mose. And he denies Christ so hard that pretty soon it becomes apparent that he's actually the only one who really believes in Christ. For everyone else in the book, Christ is this nice, comfortable little story that doesn't really bother us that much. And it's just part of our growing up, right? So there's that Shakespeare line, the lady doth protest too much. As Hazel Mose protests, we realize that, yeah, he may be the only one, in fact, who really sees what O'Connor felt was that there's one question that's more important than any other question. Did Christ redeem us or not? And there's another story by O'Connor later that she published in which the misfit, has anyone read A Good Man is Hard to Find? The misfit kills a family on the side of the road, and the misfit and the grandma talk about whether or not Jesus raised the dead. And the misfit is a murderer, broken out of prison, and he's killing people. But he says, if Christ raised the dead, there would be nothing you could do but give up all you have and follow him. And if he didn't raise the dead, then there'd be nothing to do but have all the meanness you can. And the misfit knew there's one question, right? Either he did, and that means something, and if he didn't, that means something else. And for O'Connor, this was the most important question there was, and she felt as though she was writing to a world that doesn't quite see that. So that's O'Connor, American secularism, and so forth. Wise Blood O'Connor and me, okay? Some of the reasons this book changed me, and this book was so meaningful for me, was here we have a writer of profound literary quality and deep Christian faith. So, as a Latter-day Saint, and you go to Deseret Book, and I shouldn't say that out loud. You go to Deseret Book, and there's a lot of nice, fluffy, pleasant little stuff to read. Now, there are the scriptures, and there are some other things, and there are some really good books if you sift through. But there's a lot of fluff there, a lot of nice, easy fluff. And I didn't want that. I kind of graduated from that after my mission, where I felt like I'd read everything. And I go to Deseret Book and buy a new book, and it doesn't give me anything more than the last book did. It's pleasant, it's nice. So I wanted more. I wanted profound literary quality, but I didn't want to read, frankly, some godless atheist who's going to tell me some story that ain't true, basically, right? And to find in O'Connor this combination of great literature and faith, that was huge for me, especially during those college years. And we had this dark comedy. She's hilarious. I mean, it is kind of funny, right? Some lady, Mrs. Wally B. Hitchcock, talking about, they call me Mama Doll and they call my husband Papa Doll. And then he leans forward and says, I bet you think you've been redeemed. It's kind of weird. It's kind of dark. It's funny, too. Isn't that funny? Like, whoa, what the heck is happening here? Okay, but serious religious themes and unflinching realism. O'Connor told stories about real people as they really were. She never had the problem of being too polite, especially when it comes to human nature. And the other thing that was really interesting about her and what I loved about her, in almost every college literature anthology to this day, you're going to find at least one Flannery O'Connor short story. So how she managed to be so faithful and at the same time become one of those authors like Nathaniel Hawthorne, Ernest Hemingway, all these people that show up in every college literature book and so forth, without compromising her faith, which also, reminds me of something in conference recently. You don't have to compromise your faith to be agreeable or reasonable with others. And for me, she was a model of the Christian as a writer and a thinker. Her letters, if you're interested in being a creative writer or creativity at all, one of her books published after her death is called The Habit of Being. And it's her collected letters that she wrote to friends and literary people and so on. And she's funny. That's where I got the quote about, if pigs wore garments, I wouldn't be worthy to kiss the hems of them, and that sort of thing. Her letters are very thoughtful, very faithful, very much about the creative life and that sort of thing. And then another reason she was meaningful to me, one of my books, A Sense of Order and Other Stories, short stories, very much, my own writing has been very much influenced by O'Connor. I don't think I have as much of the grotesque as O'Connor had, and I can't help myself, I'm a romantic. So most of my stories, there's something like a happy ending. Of course, before there's a happy ending though, I'm gonna drag them through the ringer. Then we get a happy ending, right? But not all of them. Some of these don't end in tragedy. You know, the ancient Greeks said there's only tragedy in comedy. So either everybody dies at the end or everybody gets married in the end. Those are the two stories. They only had two genres in those days, okay? So that's another reason she influenced me. I want to end with a thought here, thinking about the grotesque. So this was just in President Oakes's last conference talk. He told this little story about, he was at a state conference and he felt an impression to call on a woman to come and bear her testimony. And she comes up and she starts talking and he's thinking, uh-oh, where's this gonna go, right? Well, this is the story. She introduced herself as a nurse employed to watch over patients in a maximum care facility. Her patients included one she described as the most repulsive man she had ever met. From his bedridden position, he did everything he could to make life miserable for the nurses who were caring for him, including foul language, spitting on the floor, and constantly insulting them in other repulsive ways. She despised him. One evening, she heard a loud crash come from this man's room. Responding, she ran to his room and was shocked to find him fallen out of bed and thrashing about in a pool of broken glass, liquid, and blood. In that moment, a profound change came over her. She felt an almost electric current of love from our Heavenly Father to this man. She saw him as a child of God. As she knelt and held him in her arms and tried to give him comfort, he said, I want to go home. I just want to go home. In a short time, he was dead. I think that's a story of the grotesque. I think that's a story of redemption. I think that's a story that Flannery O'Connor would say, yeah, that's what we got here. We got all of us, and we're all a mess. And there's a Savior who can redeem despite us. And that's why that's a book that changed me. Thank you. Questions? These are all, by the way, when I first started studying O'Connor, there weren't all these cool art things on the internet that you could just click up Flannery O'Connor and find all this cool art stuff. She loved peacocks, by the way. Any questions? Yes.
Maybe something related to the title of the book.
Oh,
How
yes.
does that
Yeah.
is linked to the story?
Yeah. So Enoch and Hazel, but especially Enoch, has what he calls wise blood. He says, I just know things before they happen. And I know there are times when I got to do things. And they're things I don't even want to do, but I've got to do them or my wise blood won't let me be, right? And so yeah, that's why it's called wise blood. You just there's a knowing. And I think this I think for O'Connor, I don't know if I've read her say this outright, but I think for her, perhaps that wise blood or that knowing, there is a sense within us all that there's a reason why we're here. And it seems to me that even if you didn't believe in God, you would think, oh, I just messed that up and I need to fix it. Or I hurt that person and I need to go talk to them. And even if you don't believe in God, I mean, if there is no God and, we're just all, Darwinian, evolutionary, whatever, if you ran over somebody with your car, why wouldn't you just keep on driving? What makes you stop and say, oh no, are you okay? What is there? There's something deep inside that tells us that. Right? Yeah, great question. That's why it's called wise blood. Yes?
Is Wine Blood your favorite of her works?
That's a great
Or
question.
what is, I guess?
That's a great question. That's like asking me my favorite Led Zeppelin song. Sorry. That's a tough one. I think I would pick it. But yeah, it would be tough. Yeah, I guess it is.
Okay, what would be your favorite short story by her?
Favorite short story is probably Good Country People. So right now I'm teaching a class. All semester, all we're doing is reading Flannery O'Connor. So we'll be reading that in a couple of weeks. Good Country People. It's by the Bible salesman who steals this girl's wooden leg. And see, she has a PhD in philosophy. And I'm going to give away the ending here.
Whoa.
Yeah, don't listen. After he's walking off with her wooden leg, and she's so smart, because she has a PhD in philosophy and doesn't believe in God anymore. As he walks away, this simple Bible salesman man, or they're really holding their ears. Okay. He says to them, I got news for you, lady. I've been believing in nothing since I was born. Okay. So she thinks she's so smart. Right? He's like, no, that's great question. Okay, that's funny. Because you've never read it. Okay. Yeah, it's great. Good Country People.
Wait, what's the name again?
Good Country People. Because the mom says, that Bible salesman, he's just good country people. Yes.
Do you think this is a good book for like self-discovery or self-reflection on whether we believe in Christ or we believe in Christ?
That's a great question. It's not a comfortable book. But it may really force you to ask some hard questions. Yeah.
Have you seen that reflect in your faith?
I think so, yeah. I don't know. That's a great question. Because my faith's a weird thing. I'm a convert to the church. I joined the church when I was 21. And So I cannot remember a time in my life when I did not believe there was a God somehow, somewhere. And from the time I was a child, I had this belief that no matter what happens, well, there's this phrase, it'll all come out in the wash, right? So all my life, I believed, like if somebody hurt me or stole from me, it would get fixed somehow. And that was associated with God. So even though I wasn't religious and my mom and I went to church about once every 4 years to the Protestant church down the street, I just always had this sense. And then I read a Book of Mormon, sat down one day, I found this Book of Mormon when I moved to Vernal, Utah. I thought, oh, this is interesting. I've heard about these Mormons because I was interested in stuff like UFOs and Bigfoot, stuff like that. And so, golden plates and angel Moroni, that sounds interesting. So I found this book in a drawer in my sister's house, and I went and sat down, lit up a cigarette, and started reading the Book of Mormon. And right away, I believed it was true. And so my whole life in the church, I don't know, it's just been, well, this is true. It's like obviously true. So yeah, I don't know, but this has bolstered my faith. Or O'Connor gave me maybe words and ideas and thoughts to bolster my faith that I wouldn't have had without her writing. I would say that. Yeah. More questions? We got time. Yes.
I think you mentioned that like you weren't quite sure how it ended, or you were confused on
Yeah.
why it ended.
Every time we just recently read it with class, and every time the ending, I'm like, what? Why did you do that? I don't understand that. And so maybe I don't know. I don't know, why does it have to end the way it does, and what is happening there at the end? And it could be that I just still haven't figured her out. But then she was 27 years old when this book was published. Well, she died at 39. But there was some very deep genius at work there for this 27-year-old. I mean, she had been working on it since she was about 22. But maybe that's good too. Maybe I know one thing, the fact that I'm still unsettled by the ending doesn't keep me from wanting to read it again and see if I can be a little more comfortable this time. Yeah. Let's take one or two more questions. If we take one or two more questions, then we get out early, then that's a good meeting right there. Yes.
So I hope I didn't miss this. I came in a little late, but I was just wondering when she started writing and when she first started publishing.
Yeah. Okay. I can tell you. When she was a girl, she started doing art, and she started writing. When she was in high school, she was on the high school newspaper and yearbook team doing drawings, and she did this kind of thing. It's called where you take a piece of linoleum and you cut out everything that's not going to be in the picture, and then you put it on a piece of thing of ink, and then press it down so it's like the opposite, which is a very interesting work. So she did these cartoons and these caricatures in high school, and then she started writing, and she thought she was going to go into the newspaper business and be like doing comics and stuff when she went to Iowa, but she got there and realized she's not a journalist and switched her major to creative writing. Yeah.
Are those her artwork? Right?
Those are not, no. But there's a great book called just on her cartoons. Yeah. I don't know if we have that book here. I'd ask me. Okay, yes.
How many times have you read Wise Blood?
That's a great question. I would probably not that many. I would probably say like 7 or 8. But no, there might be more than that because I probably read it at least 3 times while I was working on my master's thesis. So yeah, not that many times. Okay, yes.
I mean, each and every time you read, do you get different insights?
Oh yes. Yeah, different insights and more appreciation, like, oh my gosh, that sentence right there is basically what the whole book is about. When I had missed that before. Yeah. So every time I read it, and that's what great literature should be, right? And a part of what great literature should be is when you read it when you're 20, then you read it when you're 30. What's changed is not the work, but what has changed is you have changed. And same thing with the scriptures, right? The scriptures get deeper and deeper because you change, you understand more, and then you read it and you're like, when did they put that in there? I never read that before, even though, wait, I read the Book of Mormon, I didn't see that part. Okay, one final question. Yes?
You know, when you talk about books that are all fluff or what I would call overwhelming positivity, and you're kind of tired of that and you want a bit more realism, but you don't necessarily want to go as dark as Wise Blood. Do you have any middle ground book recommendations that are more just real and grounded in our real experience, but also helpful? And
I have one response to that. Good luck. And you know what's hard nowadays too is you know, the book's got swear words in it, it's got sexual scenes in it or something like that. And yeah, how do you navigate that? I do not know an easy answer to navigate this. I know my wife, she's just decided she's going to read young adult, but even the young adult stuff is changing, right? Yeah, I don't know. How do you get what is real and honest? Yeah, that's a tough question. And I think ultimately you just have to figure out, okay, here's where I'm going to be and here's what I'm going to do. And I'm not going to try to push that view onto somebody else. Yeah, that's tough. But then, you know, this joke where somebody's talking about something inappropriate and the guy says, I read about that in the Bible. And it's true, right? Yeah, that inappropriate thing, it's in the Bible, there it is. So what are you going to do, not read the Bible? Right? This is difficult. But I think too, I'd say since many of us here are younger than me, this is one of the reasons you're in college, right? You're realizing, okay, these questions are not easy. And I'm going to have to sort through them for myself. Okay, great question to end on. Thanks everybody for coming. Have a great day.
Thank you.